Portugal's mountain ranges, or serras, hang on the horizon like curtains of granite. They frame the very soul of the people here. Antonio Alçada Batista wrote, "When nature manifests itself as mountains and rocks, men become different inside. Here, their adventure turns inwards." So legend has it that Serra da Estrela breeds priests and politicians and writers of great thoughts, people who rise to the greater good. Perhaps this is not a place where men stand in the shadows of mountains, but where the mountains stand in the shadows of men. Serra da Estrela was one of Portugal's natural lines of defense, a perch for lofty outposts with wary eyes cast eastward toward Spain. Guarda, the guard, was once a military base for Caesar, then a Moorish citadel before passing hands to local control nearly 1,000 years ago. Stout as the mountains, Portugal's fortresses still stand as monuments of war. On the Spanish border, Almeida is the site of a classic six-pointed fortification. Once under siege by the Spanish, then by the French, the dust of battle has long since settled. These stone sentinels remain as the first chapter in the history of many towns of old Portugal. The Minho, the garden. Gentle river valleys stretch to the ocean, where green melts into blue. Rolling woodlands of olive and apple, eucalyptus and pine. It is no wonder that Portugal's very beginnings took root in this region. The Minho is blessed with natural splendor and possibilities the rest of Portugal can only admire from afar. The tower of the Basilica of Santa Lucia provides not only the perfect vista of Viana do Castelo below, but also the most commanding view of Portugal's sprawling north coast. In Braga, the country's religious center, a majestic stairway, lined by fountains, marks the entrance to the ancient pilgrimage site, Bom Jesus. Guimarães is the very cradle of Portugal, the country's first capital nearly 1,000 years ago. Its noble beginning as a medieval fortress was marked by the birth of Afonso Henriques, who later was to become Portugal's first king. From province to province, village to village, folk arts and dance commemorate the 4 seasons in Portugal. On a hilltop in Suajo, amid stone-grain sills, the completion of the fall harvest is cause for celebration. In the valleys along the Douro River, the hillsides are terraced to expose the delicate vines to the warming rays of the sun. This is where bushels become bottles of port wine, Portugal's most celebrated export. The warmth of Portugal is expressed in many ways. A famous Porto proverb suggests that Coimbra studies, Braga prays, Lisbon celebrates, and Porto works. Portugal's second largest city is industrious by nature. It is proud that the country bears its name from its old Roman designation, Portus Cali. This economic hub of the north is the world's shipping capital for port wine. But while Porto's dreams are set in a prosperous future, it will not be at the expense of its past. The heart of the city is a World Heritage Site. Crowded sidewalks and squares, streaming traffic on land and water. It all suggests a city with its eye on business. Even Porto's bridges are highly industrial designs, with one critic praising them as Eiffel Towers turned on their sides. On the central coast, Aveiro, Portugal's little Venice, is known for its beaches, its salt, and its canal. The air is perfumed with ocean spray from the Atlantic and the aroma of grilled sardines from the morning's catch. Just inland from Aveiro, at Busaco, the atmosphere changes to the sense of eucalyptus, Mexican cedar, and Himalayan pine. All exotic trees brought back from the great discoveries to take root in what is now a celebrated forest preserve. Portugal's most prestigious seat of learning is the University of Coimbra, one of the first to be established in the world. Coimbra has graduated many of the country's greatest poets and politicians. The school's Romanesque design is inspired by authentic Roman ruins still standing in nearby Coimbriga. Further down the central coast, seaside villages echo Portugal's great discoveries. Near Figueira da Foz, the windmills are built with wooden masts and four sails. Nearby, in Nazaré, precipitous cliffs dangle over the surf like the bows of 1,000 ships, ready to be launched into the Atlantic breeze. While the beaches are placid in hues of pearl, here the Atlantic remains wild, swelling with each westerly. Writer Manuel Alegre describes it perfectly. The Atlantic is green with syllables of salt, blue vowels, and white consonants. Berlenga Island points to the west, a solid granite island that appears to already have set sail for the open seas. As here in Caldas da Rainha, every Portuguese town has its open market, overflowing with produce and crafts and the promise of a bargain. But the shopping is secondary. The news of the day is debated much more than the prices. In the Middle Ages, a Portuguese king was so taken with the beauty of Óbidos, he gave the town as a gift to his queen. This romantic story explains why some people call Óbidos the wedding city. Batalha is the site of one of Portugal's most cherished landmarks, the monastery of Santa Maria da Vitória. It was built to celebrate the Battle of Aljubarrota, a turning point in the Portuguese 14th century revolt against Spanish domination. According to legend, the Portuguese King John I, hopelessly outnumbered by the Castilian army, made a pact with the Virgin Mary herself, promising to build a monastery in return for victory. This holy place stands as a miracle in more ways than one. Nearby in Tomar, the Christ Convent is another reverent reminder of victories past. It is a legacy from the Knights Templar of the 12th century. Fatima is the altar of Portugal. Here, in 1917, 3 children witnessed an apparition of the Virgin Mary. Though dismissed as a hoax at first, the apparitions returned 5 more times, with the final appearance a swirling display of light before 70,000 believers, many of whom were miraculously healed on the spot. Now, millions flock here annually to pay homage to the sanctity and mystery of Fatima. In the Ribatejo, horses and fighting bulls are almost a cult, and so it is here that we find the country's greatest cattle ranches, in this region of rich pastures, river meadowland, and great water resources. At the mouth of the river Tagus is Lisbon, or Lisboa, its rightful Portuguese name. Serene Harbor is the translation of its original name, given by the Phoenicians some 20 centuries ago. Lisbon is Portugal's most visible link to Europe and the world, with its sprawling plazas and squares laid out with geometric flair, right down to the smallest mosaic tile. Lisbon's present is its past, where chrome and glass skyscrapers reflect their medieval, Moorish, and Baroque predecessors. Perhaps Lisbon's blend of eras and architecture is the visual interpretation of saudade, or sense of longing that underlies the Portuguese character. Longing for things past, for things to be. Saudade is the same restless tide that took Portuguese explorers around the world. Saudade is the current which flows through the soul of Lisbon's people. Saudade is the stream of bittersweet fado music that echoes in Lisbon's streets. Just outside the city of Lisbon, in Queluz, grand manor houses and Baroque country palaces are rivaled only by the exquisite gardens which represent the height of European aristocracy. Portugal prides itself on one special tradition of regal Europe, its royal equestrian team. who turned the discipline of riding into nothing short of ballet. Sintra is known for its grand palaces, the most extravagant being the Palacio Nacional da Pena. Sintra enchanted poet Lord Byron, who said it combined all the wildness of the Western Highlands with the verdure of the south of France. Hundreds of feet above restless seas stands Cabo da Roca, a finger of land pointing decidedly west. No other point on continental Europe is closer to the setting sun. The sign of the cross stands watch at the cliff's edge, blessing all who dare the perils of the Atlantic. From the ancient bulwarks of Marvão, sheep bells ring out from flocks grazing miles away. The horizon widens. There's another sense of time. The military religious orders that settled here in the Middle Ages used the few elevations in the rolling plains of the Alentejo as vantage points to build their castles. From their high towers, the nightly priests could watch over the sowing fields, as trustees of the vast lands their Christian king had wrenched from the Moors. From those medieval strongholds arose the towns that now dot the landscape, like islands in a hinterland ocean of endless fields and plains. The Alentejo was the cradle of the first European riding horse, the Lusitano breed, depicted in the Escorial cave some 15,000 years ago, and still raised today at Altair. Phoenicians, Greeks, and Romans were so astounded by the speed and horsemanship of the local warriors that they believed Iberian mares were sired by the wind. In the last century, after the extinction of the religious orders, trading increased and urban centers grew. Cattle were imported to supplement the traditional sheep and goats. Mines and quarries were industrialized, most of all the celebrated marble of Estremoz. The Industrial Revolution introduced machines that increased wheat production, raising hopes that the Alentejo might yet become Portugal's granary. Pork production received a boost too, to seal the work begun at the Douro vineyards. Here, the largest cities such as the age-old Évora, a World Heritage Center, are situated inland. They did not develop round a harbor as elsewhere in the country. While most of Portugal is married to the sea, the Alentejo flirts with the sun. The ancestral Mediterranean traditions still endure in the cooking, in song, in a peculiar sense of time, in the hospitality to travelers, and in the tales of enchanting Moorish princesses. The Guadiana River. Thousands of years ago, it was the great waterway into the Iberian hinterland, opening it to prehistoric settlement and later to the trading ships of successive civilizations. Today, navigation is reduced to sightseeing tours, but the waters of the Guadiana, through a network of dams, promise renewed vitality to the lower Alentejo. The Algarve on the south coast is Portugal's most sought-after destination. Everywhere, modern architecture with Moorish motifs. The southern face of Portugal has a decidedly Mediterranean flair. Yet most people forget that these soothing shores are still the domain of the Atlantic. Here the sun truly is golden, the sea azure. Faro and Tavira were once sleepy fishing villages, which awoke to become the anchoring cities in the Algarve, or Algarve as the Moors called it, meaning the West. We undress ourselves for the beach, are hypnotized by its quiet thunder, rolling arcs of sea foam. North African breezes sweep over an imposing coastline. The Mediterranean sculpts out secluded coves. No one can resist the allure of the Algarve. It seduces us. waves steal our footprints in the sand, wash away all cares and worries. Leave only a blank horizon to contemplate. The interior of the Algarve is a secret world of uplands and wilds that rise above cultivated field. With the muted beauty of heather and rock roses, the serras here still wall off the province from the rest of Portugal, and thus opened the Algarve to a tide of Moorish settlements a millennium ago. Today, Moorish castles and walled enclaves still dot the Algarve's hidden flanks. Sagres marks the southwesternmost point of mainland Europe. In the 15th century, the edge of the known world. It was here that Portugal's most famous mariner, Henry the Navigator, took up residence in his quest to master the seas. With a cadre of shipmasters and cartographers, with an eye to the winds and the stars, with the belief that science was more powerful than idols and gods, it was Henry who launched Portugal's age of discoveries. There is no peril so great that the hope of reward will not be greater. Sailors left Portuguese shores as adventurers, returned to Portuguese soil as heroes. Like a fleet of ships from the great discoveries, the Azores stretch out across the Atlantic in nautical formation. Originally rising in volcanic fury from the depth of the ocean, the Azores still bear the scars of their violent birth. Calderas, or craters, some with lakes at their bottom, mark every island. The vertical terrain racing down to the sea often leaves little room for the likes of man. The northernmost and smallest of the islands, Corvo, is also the last golden link in the Azores archipelago. Simple, pristine, and reachable only by boat, presence of the sea is everywhere. Fayal is a near obligatory stopover for sailors crossing the northern Atlantic. Tradition demands that passing sailors must leave their name on the pier at Horta, Faial's harbor city. It is easy to be lulled into complacency in the Azores. But the island's truce with man is a tenuous one. Here on Capelinos in 1957, a series of volcanic eruptions added a square mile of molten earth to Faial. Pico, Portugal's highest peak, is a sleeping giant rising abruptly from the sea against the skies of the Azores. For now, the mountain sleeps, but its fiery breath remains a visible reminder of its turbulent past. Small islands sectioned into small plots define much of the Azores. Stacked stone walls delineate crops of sugar beets and tea, exotic fruits and tobacco. The island life is a farming life, where cities, villages, and homes compete with every arable tract. Originally called Christ's Island, Terceira owes its name to the fact that it was the third island to be discovered and settled. Angra do Heroísmo is perhaps the loveliest city in the Azores. Its original Renaissance layout has been lovingly maintained through the centuries, leading to its classification as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO. Terceira is where the islanders' deeply religious and proudly traditional spirit is most manifest. The church calendar is punctuated by many high-spirited, colorful celebrations. And when a terrible earthquake devastated Angra on New Year's Day 1980, the population, zealous of its heritage, at once rolled up its sleeves, engaged international help, and got down to rebuilding it just as it was before. The southernmost island of the Azores, Santa Maria, is graced by dragon trees, jacarandas, beaches, and palms. It was the first island to be settled back in 1427. With the whitest beaches and most clement air, Santa Maria remains one of the least visited islands. On São Miguel, the largest of the 9 islands, fields are laid out like sections of stained glass. The countryside is awash in vibrant greens which run down hillsides, bleed into the sea, color every fold of earth in serene fertility. Greens of peace, greens of tranquility, Eden in the Atlantic. The sun glances off the Atlantic and bathes the cliffs of Madeira and Porto Santo in amber and gold. These 2 islands were among the very first of Portugal's great discoveries. In 1419, 2 exploratory ships blown off course from the coast of Africa found safety off the shores of Porto Santo, hence the name which means Blessed Harbor. Reporting their find back in Portugal, they were ordered to return and subsequently happened upon the island of Madeira as well. God created Madeira to entice the senses, dress the landscape in exotic, fragrant flowers, bless the land with the coveted Madeira grape. In the era of sea exploration and trade, barrels of Madeira wine were used as ballast in the holds of the sailing ships. When the ships returned to the island after years at sea, the wine was ceremoniously unloaded, having aged to perfection. Portugal's spine presses against continental Europe. Its gaze is fixed upon the Atlantic. Its soul echoes strains of Africa. Timeless beauty. Beauty from times past. Its discovery continues. Places proud and majestic, and some as simple as the sun and sea. Places with a quiet grace, and places bound by fury, with a single torch to lead the way. There once was a time when European nations looked to the seas and dreamed of far-off places. There will always be new dreams and dreamers and the call of distant horizons. And there will always be Portugal, where the discovery never ends.